Thank you all for joining us today for the Arena webinar series presented by GalwayPlus. This is the second conversation that we've been able to put together for you all, and we're really excited today to have a conversation called The Inner Game of Excellence. GalwayPlus is a financial services platform, and we all know that whether we're in the world of sports or in the world of business, it is really about our mental strength and our ability to bring everything to the table that makes the difference. We were lucky enough to have Dr. Vanessa Shannon join us last year at Galway Live and Arena, where she was one of the participants on a conversation about wellness. And she did an amazing job. And she also was willing to come back and bring some friends along for a deeper conversation on the topic. So we're really excited to have this group of amazing experts together today. I'm going to kick it over to Vanessa to introduce everyone.
Thanks so much, Patrick. My colleagues and I are excited to be here with you all today, and we're really excited to regroup with the Galway folks and talk about the inner game of excellence, performance psychology for sport, business, and everyday life. We're going to conduct this a little bit more kind of like a roundtable discussion within us. Please, if you have questions, put those in the chat for us. We'd love to answer those for you. I'm going to start with some brief introductions. As Patrick mentioned, my name is Vanessa Shannon. I started my own business, Optimize Consulting, about a year ago, where I help my clients, both individuals and teams, minimize disruptions, maximize potential in work, and optimize performance. Before transitioning into private consulting, I held full-time positions with IMG Academy, Louisville Athletics, and the Cincinnati Reds. And when I'm not serving my clients, I can be found cheering on my nephews, Spencer, who is a member of the University of Texas football team, and Owen, who's a baseball player out in high school in California, as well as my husband, Andy, who happens to be a Division I men's lacrosse coach at Bellarmine University here in Louisville, where I am. I am really excited to share my colleagues with you all today and my good friends. First off is Dr. Melinda Houston, who also owns her own business, SoCal Mental Performance Consulting, out in Southern California. Melinda is a former track athlete who specialized, I should say, in the 400-meter hurdles. She does not love to talk about this, but it is definitely a feather in her cap that she was also a competitive triathlete who completed 50 competitive triathlons and was a former member of Team USA triathlon. Her athletic pursuits, and I love this, and her role as a parent of 2 children, Lexi and Jake, allow her a daily opportunity to strengthen her mindset. So thanks for being here, Melinda. Also, Dr. Ashwin Patel, who is graciously joining us from London. Ash is a professor and program coordinator for the Sport Management and Recreation and Leisure Services programs in the Faculty of Business at Humber College. He is also a mental performance consultant for the New Jersey Devils, the Utica Comets of the AHL, and the Guelph Storm of the OHL. For over 20 years, Ashwin has worked closely with elite individual athletes and high-performing teams from a range of organizations that includes the 2024 Paris Canadian Olympic team and the Vancouver Canucks. Ash lives in Guelph, Ontario, Canada, with his wife Anna and 2 daughters, Keelan and Hadley. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Mark Cormier, who serves as the Director of Sport and Exercise Psychology Graduate Program at the University of Kentucky. In addition to his faculty responsibilities, he has a 50% appointment with UK Athletics, where he coordinates all counseling and performance psychology services. Mark has been invited to speak to audiences in various non-sport performance contexts, such as surgeons, performance artists, emergency responders, and Fortune 500 leaders, including a recent TED Talk titled How to Develop a Mindset for Peak Performance. A native of Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, Mark is every bit the stereotypical Canadian, self-professed. He enjoys cold weather, a good cup of Tim Hortons coffee, maple syrup, being friendly, and hockey. And outside of UK, he loves spending time with the brilliant women in his life, his wife, Jesselyn, and 2 young daughters, Alice and Eleanor. So really excited to have this crew with me today to have this discussion about the inner game of excellence. Today, we're going to share with you an overview of what performance psychology looks like in a number of different performance environments and industries, some of the misconceptions about performance psychology, some of the common performance related challenges experienced by individuals, teams, and organizations, and then some science backed psychological strategies for optimizing your performance, no matter your arena. Performance psychology is the study and application of the psychological factors that enhance human performance. And the field really blends insights from behavioral psychology, cognitive science, sport and exercise science, neuroscience to help individuals and teams optimize performance. Melinda, I'd love for you to start. A common misconception about performance psychology is that it's really only for elite athletes. And that's obviously a narrow scope of what we're going to be talking about here today. So, would you talk a little bit about the evolution of the field from what we would formerly call sports psychology to what we now call performance psychology?
Yes, definitely. So many of us in this field have had some type of athletic background. So I know Vanessa mentioned mine, but all of us in this space certainly have a good athletic background to speak of. And so along with that, we usually began our applied work with a focus on the sport setting. And then at some point, we kind of dipped our toe into a different space. And so I can remember for me, several years ago, my first experience with a person who was not related to any kind of sport environment was with an opera singer who had reached out to me. And I can remember even at that time being somewhat apprehensive about whether or not I would be able to help her, right? Not having that firsthand experience, especially of that kind of performance environment. But I learned really quickly that actually many of the strategies I might suggest to an athlete who's experiencing performance anxiety also translated really well in terms of talking with an opera singer about her performance anxiety. Fast forward several years later, once I was back in Los Angeles, I actually had a screenwriter reach out to me. And he reached out because he recognized he was engaging in certain self-sabotaging thoughts and behaviors, actually out of a fear of success, which is more common, I think, than people realize. And he had been an athlete all throughout high school and college. And so he recognized the benefits of having some type of coach figure and actually purposefully sought out a sport related professional. And that type of support role felt really familiar with him. So, again, not a performance taking place in a sporting environment, but really similar challenges and utilizing a lot of the same strategies that I might use with an athlete or with a coach. And so many of us have had these types of experiences, and it led to research that started investigating and demonstrating really solidly this effectiveness of these strategies across performance domains. And so now, as Vanessa mentioned, sports psychology has really evolved beyond athletic arenas, and our field is more commonly referred to as performance psychology. A few other examples of how we've shifted into other spaces. A great one is with the military. They started utilizing performance psychology in the early 90s, and our presence in these spaces has grown significantly over time. A little bit more recently, other tactical populations such as firefighters and police have accessed our services. I recently have been contracted with a company called O2X, who very specifically focuses on these types of tactical performance settings. And so, like some major areas of focus that I might come in with as a mental performance specialist, certainly strategies related to attentional control, a lot of different stimuli going on in these types of environments. And so, really, how to figure out what are the distractions, how to maintain present focus, as well as how to be able to shift that level of activation in the body in order to meet demands of really incredibly stressful situations that they are often facing. Our work translates very well into corporate populations. Most of my consulting is actually now done with business professionals. And then even healthcare, I'd say, is a slightly newer space that's recognizing the value of performance psychology. And I know Vanessa has been engaging with some folks in that area. And so she's going to talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Melinda, for helping the audience understand a bit about the evolution of the field. Before I talk about healthcare settings, I do want to quickly mention, you mentioned that you worked with some performing artists and entertainers, and I know that all of us have. And I just want to quickly touch on a couple of nuances in these types of performance environments because they are quite unique. When we think of high performers, oftentimes we do get stuck in athletics. And then even when our mind allows us kind of to widen our understanding of high performers, our mind typically still goes to individuals who are competing in visible and measurable arenas where success and failure are really clear. But performance demands experienced by performance artists and entertainers are just as intense and sometimes less understood. Because unlike many of the clients that we serve, individuals who can measure success and wins and losses and profits and KPIs, performing artists and entertainers face subjective judgment. And success is often decided, basically on the emotional whims of the audience or the critics. And so that emotional labor that performing artists and entertainers shoulder is really immense. To have to move an audience by being vulnerable and raw, all while knowing that their vulnerability is ultimately going to be scrutinized and reviewed and rated. And so I just wanted to mention that, piggybacking on your discussion about your opera singer and screenwriter and things like that. In terms of performance psychology in healthcare settings, it is kind of a newer leap, if you will, but I think a pretty normal leap because across the country and across roles, we're really witnessing a critical strain on the human infrastructure of healthcare. And it's been building for some time, where we have individuals who've been trained in the technical skills necessary to do their jobs, similar to what we would find in business, but haven't necessarily been trained to manage the mental and emotional demands of such high stress, high consequence performance environments. And the result is really a gap between the demands of healthcare and the support that we offer the people that are being asked to meet those demands. And ultimately, what the research is showing is that it's hurting outcomes, it's draining talent, and it's even costing lives. And so the psychological demands of the job just seem to have outpaced the psychological support built into the system. So we're seeing burnout, attrition, compassion, fatigue among very well-intentioned professionals who are pushed to literally their cognitive and emotional limits. And performance psychology offers a mechanism by which we can grow the capacity of healthcare professionals and systems to really better tolerate the demands of the performance environment. So I have a number of clients who are healthcare professionals who are looking to do just that. But the truth is, we find performance environments really anywhere we look. And so I know Melinda and Mark and Ashwin all consult with one of the big four. And I think Ashwin is going to speak to us a little bit about working with business professionals or corporate athletes.
Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, and I think it's an exciting kind of time that a lot more corporations are recognizing the strain that is placed on their workforce. And from a performance psychology, from a consulting standpoint, within these big four firms, one of our colleagues kind of brought this to my attention, saying, the four biggest performers in the Boston branch make more money than the starting pitching of the Boston Red Sox, and that was really illuminating for me, in the sense of, wow, like that's like, and so I just asked the question. So then, how do you protect that? Like, what do you do to ensure that those individuals that are the high performers have the support to be able to navigate some of the challenges that are there? And one of the wonderful things about the big four is that they often have a lot of support. There are a lot of wonderful executive coaches that are in that space that assist individuals as they're transitioning through either promotions or potential challenges. And they're often counseling psychologists, performance psychology practitioners, even licensed social workers. So the corporate world is recognizing the importance of that area. And what we do, the four of us in particular, and others that have similar backgrounds, is we try to dig a little bit deeper, right? We try to provide some strategies uh, So it's not just, okay, you have a challenge with time management. Let's get into the calendar and figure out what it is that we're going to be able to do. Maybe we find out why, right? Why is this a struggle? What are some of the obstacles that you're experiencing here? And what are some strategies that we can navigate so that this can become a habit for you to be able to perform a little bit better? And so I do think that's really important. And then, the one of the things that often gets mentioned is this kind of uncertainty when we have these conversations with recently promoted individuals or partners or managing directors. And they're like, so can you explain the difference between, like, am I doing okay? Like, why am I talking to you? Is there something wrong? And I think Mark is the one person of the four of us that I think is best suited because of his background. Mark, would you mind kind of talking a little bit about kind of that continuum of mental health and mental performance and maybe some of the stigmas that are associated with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that we see very frequently, honestly, when we're, especially in the earlier meetings, whether it's those initial conversations about starting to get, integrated within a new system, a new culture, new teams, structures, things like that, is outlining exactly what it is that we do. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about anything that surrounds the word psychology. A lot of people just assume like it's one big bucket, everything gets thrown into it, and anybody with any sort of background in education and psychology is sort of capable of kind of doing pretty much everything. The reality is, at least this is the way that I've always conceptualized it, and I think it's helped a lot of people just sort of navigate what it is that we do and what it means is, if we think about sport and now slash performance psychology, because at the end of the day, I think we can all sort of agree that performance is performance is performance, right? So humans, whatever context they're in, perform all the time. And so here we have a field that has traditionally been rooted in sport, but as Melinda talked about, is really merging into some of the more non-sport structures, talking about healthcare, talking about the military populations, talking about the corporate settings and those kinds of things. But honestly, ultimately, when I talk about sport and performance psychology, I kind of imagine a giant umbrella, right? And so the reason I do that is because it is an umbrella term, and a lot of things sort of fall underneath that umbrella. And if we imagine an umbrella and we've got a handle and I'm holding it over my head, on the one side, we've got mental health. And again, that's that knee-jerk reaction. When we hear the word psychology, we think of mental health. Some of those traditional things that come up: anxiety, depression, adjustment disorder, any sort of thing that, that immediately pops into your head, falls under that guise. Yes, that's certainly part of it. Also recognizing that requires specialized training and licensing, and not everybody who's trained especially sport and performance psychology has that credential. And so we have the mental health piece on this side of the umbrella. If we switch over to the other side of the handle, we have what I sort of call mental fitness. Mental fitness is a lot of the things that we are talking about here, which aren't really related to any sort of deficit. It's related to really kind of proactively engaging people to think about, what is it that I'm doing and why, right? So why am I wired this way? Why do I perform this way? Why is it that I sort of struggle to manage these kinds of things? What is my leadership philosophy? What does it mean to have a leadership philosophy? Why are the people that are being led by me engaging in these sort of behaviors? Why is it trending in this way? And so that is not related to mental health. That is not related to a person's anxiety or anything like that. It certainly could be, but in the spectrum of what we're doing, it's completely separate. There are, of course, people who kind of bridge this gap, who hold the umbrella, right? Who have that credential, that certification over here and the license over here. And that's all well and good, but you're going to find that most of the people are going to live in either camps, because it's really difficult to kind of bounce back and forth and create and cultivate this professional identity of what it is that you actually do without sort of blurring the lines a little bit. So it is a continuum. We have people who kind of dance back and forth on either side of the line, but for the most part, you're going to find individuals that are there. And to be perfectly honest, there's a lot of research outlining the benefits of performance psychology specialists, and many of the big corporations and a lot of, look across the big five professional sport organizations, pretty much every team, all the, I don't want to say Power Five, but Power Four conferences in the NCAA now all have embedded folks. And so, yet we're still sort of faced with this question of, if it's so great, why isn't everyone doing it? Why isn't this just a normal everyday thing that is just part of the system? And, through my nearly 20 years of doing this in conversations with folks, we've sort of figured out that, yeah, cost is certainly there, right? It costs money, and that's not something that individuals or leaders traditionally think about as like that first thing that they want to invest money in, because of the second reason, which is a general lack of understanding, right? So everything I just explained, for example, is something that not a whole lot of people think about, right? And so again, they think, oh, we're going to bring in somebody in performance psychology, and everybody always sort of kind of backs away and says like, ooh, I don't know that I want to be seen talking to this person because of the psychology piece, which brings me to that third reason why it's not everywhere, is the stigma. Right. And so, and that's usually because historically we've kind of taken a medical model approach to these types of things. And I'll admit, like, I work with Kentucky Athletics and I work with all 22 of our programs. And at first it was very much this setting, which was, I'll go see him when I'm not performing well. When I reach my slump, when things aren't really working out to the degree that I was hoping or my coaches had sort of in mind for my sophomore or junior year, I'll reach out. But right now I'm doing okay. So I'm good. Right. And without fail, when I meet with seniors, it always comes back down to, really wish I would have done this freshman year. Right. So I really wish I would have really built this foundation from the ground up, as opposed to wait for something to go wrong to realize that, like, oh, it needs to be fixed and all that kind of stuff. And then that fourth reason why it's not really embedded, I think, is because there's just finding fit, right? Finding, specifically assessing the needs of whatever organization you're with, and then figuring out, like, what kind of person do I need? Like, what hole do we need to fit? What need do we need to meet with the individuals here? And that's really more of like a culture thing. And Melinda, I'm wondering if you can kind of expand a little bit on more like the cultural piece or the system level approach within corporate settings specifically, and help us understand a little bit about how that works.
Yes, definitely. So the consulting firm that I have familiarity with, they have had, and Ash talked about this a little bit, but they have had clinical psychologists and executive coaches as resources for quite a period of time. And it was actually the head of the clinical psychology program there that recognized there was an additional need for those of us in the performance psych space. And so several of us were hired as external consultants who really would just be focusing on the individual needs of the employees. And then a little while later, again, the services were really well received. And they thought, gosh, it might actually be useful for us to have a few full-time performance psych people on the inside, right, so to speak. And they could help really address some of the issues from that systemic approach. And so, like, I'll give a couple examples of certain topics that I have heard about recently, and I think how it works really well to have kind of both types of consultants working right towards these things. So transitions is talked about very frequently, and I think there's a lot of both external and internal transitions that take place in these kind of spaces. So certainly, I think we're very familiar with the idea of the shift from the remote working world to hybrid, and now there's an office presence requirement, but what does that actually look like, and how can I push the limits here? And so we see that type of thing. There is within the consulting firms, there is legally a requirement where they have to make a major change to internal leadership after every 3 years. And so they know that this is going to take place. There's a lot of policy changes that come along with that. Still creates quite a bit of stress. And then there's certain things, even just like in terms of the shifts with DEI that we're seeing now, which certainly has an influence in this space, right? Another transition. And so as external consultants, we might be trying to help individuals focus on how to find control and comfort amidst all of this uncertainty. Whereas our internal specialists might be trying to figure out if there are certain practice areas within the firm that are experiencing greater amounts of stress, due to some of these transitions and try to see if like, can we actually make some changes here? Or how do we need to kind of deploy our external people, right, in certain areas to try and help what we're seeing from this internal kind of organizational lens. Another thing I hear about very frequently is people talking about the younger, less experienced team members viewing work very differently. And they'll refer to them sometimes as unmotivated, which I try and shift them to they are just not motivated by the same things that you are anymore. And so I might address this by helping them try and figure out how to ask questions differently of the people that they're working with to try and assess if people's needs are actually being met and if there's something they could do to alter that approach. Whereas our internal folks actually do some group work with the leaders on some of these topics. They might talk about how to shift reward structures, recognizing that the things that motivated people in our age group perhaps are not really cutting it anymore, right, for some of the younger people. And so they might address that again from that kind of inside systemic approach. So it's kind of an ideal situation, I would say, of being able to address issues both individually and from that kind of higher up, kind of inside organizational approach. But really this idea that you can have all these professionals and everyone's working together and supporting each other from different spaces really has worked really well, at least in this particular setting. I was going to punt it over to Ash, who's had a lot of experience in, I think, different levels of athletics as well. And so maybe to talk about if you're seeing any similarities in terms of trying to apply performance psychology in corporate systems and in some of these athletic systems. So some of the things you're seeing there.
Yeah, I think the theme that we've kind of been sharing tonight is that there is a lot of overlap. There is a lot of opportunities, and there's also a lot of challenges. Every organization is different. Every athletic population is different in terms of their perception and their belief in what performance psychology can do. And we've heard countless stories in both domains. Like, I think I've had one of you before, ... And then they go into a different direction. And I think all four of us would like to ask, tell me about the person you were chatting with. What was their background? What did they talk about? Because there have been a lot of people in this space because it's a fun space to be in. But the challenge with that is that those individuals that maybe haven't been trained or haven't had that, the educational background, then it can really leave a negative mark on the rest of this population, this consulting population. So to your point, Melinda, yes, a lot of similarities. For example, in the corporate world, managing directors and partners might be like, why do my team, like, why do they keep making mistakes? Why don't they seem to care about the work as much as I do? Why aren't they singular in terms of their drive and motivation? The number of times I have conversations with coaches in the sport domain, they're like, well, I don't get it. I don't know why they're going home at 12. They should be here till 6 o'clock like I am. And, my partner understands that I'm going to be sleeping at the office all day. So that that is slightly starting to shift. The more is better. Like, you don't really care unless you're sleeping over in the office, like that kind of a symbol of pride, that the lack of sleep and whatnot. But I do think it's really important from when an organization truly values the ability of its team to be able to perform, whether in sport or in the corporate world, are they also providing opportunities for their team members to be able to thrive? And are they supporting them? So from an organizational approach, I've heard it from a general manager, listen, we're going to demand a lot from our athletes and we're going to demand a lot for our coaches. And they're going to have to learn how to deal with some of these demands. And right now, the team that I'm supporting is in the playoffs. And it's difficult. They're away from their home. They're stressed. They're hearing from the press, just like individuals in the corporate sector right now that are finishing, tax season. The number of those conversations about, oh my goodness, I didn't sleep. I have to make it up to my significant other and to my kids. It's always vacation time right now because of that. So from this perspective, for a lot of individuals that are working in this, it's recognizing that, is this starting to align with my respective values, right? it's challenging because there is often the realities of your ability to be able to perform, hitting your numbers, winning or losing. And that can be really important to an individual. Working after a cycle with the Olympics, that is 4 years of commitment that you may not even make the Olympics. And if you're doing that and you do everything right and you still don't make it, then you're looking at, okay, what does this mean? So the national sport organizations are trying to be better at providing resources, including mental, physical training, nutrition, etc., so that they can optimize people's abilities to perform. But there's not always going to be the buy-in. And I think, Vanessa, you're going to have a really unique lens here. How do we get buy-in from leadership for these organizational approaches within performance psychology?
Yeah, thanks, Ashwin. That's a great question because the success of any organizational approach to performance psychology really hinges on that buy-in from leadership, regardless of whether the setting is in athletics, business, entertainment. When leaders embrace performance psychology, not as kind of this add-on or this check the box approach, but as a core strategy for optimizing human potential, it really maximizes the impact that performance psychology can have. So whether it's in sports, and we're talking about front office administrators, coaches who prioritize and promote mental training alongside physical conditioning, or in business, we're talking about executives or managers who really support and champion the development of psychological and emotional flexibility amongst their employers, or even in the entertainment space, if we're looking at what are production companies doing, labels, are they embracing performance psychology resources and support for the individuals that they lead and serve? And buy-in, by the way, doesn't just mean providing the resource for the employees, right? Or for the players or for the entertainers. It also means making the resource accessible and supporting access to the resource. So for example, one thing that a lot of Major League Baseball organizations are doing in terms of leadership and buy-in to performance psychology for their players, for their coaches, is they're housing offices in Major League clubhouses, which is quite unique, right? That's like not something that you saw before. Where's the money to build that? Where's the space? We need that space for the cages. We need that space for the strength and conditioning space. So when I was with the Cincinnati Reds, I actually had an office at the end of the strength and conditioning space, right up one of the exits from the dugout up the tunnel. And that was a demonstration of the buy-in of the leadership at the Reds, specifically my direct report at the time, Jeff Head, who's now with the Chicago White Sox, but him really championing this and knowing that it had to come from the top in order for our players to, number one, recognize there was a resource, but number two, feel like they had the ability to actually access the resource. And so I think, it's a difficult call to action for leaders in any of these spaces, because again, buying in doesn't just mean, okay, we hired someone, we checked a box, there's that person in case you ever want to talk to them. It really means buying in and living it as well yourself, being willing, being vulnerable, to develop your skills in that space too, so that from a cultural perspective, people see the individuals at the top doing it, so they know that it's a thing you can do, but they also know that it is a thing that's valued within the organization. Some other things I think throughout my experiences that I've seen leaders do to demonstrate that buy-in, right, is developing a common language. So all of, sports, business, again, entertainment, healthcare, we have common jargon, we have common language. Are we integrating language about performance psychology into the existing way that we communicate within our organization or within our team? So when we talk about it, we're more likely to do it. And again, that demonstrates value from leadership. And I think certainly this is something that we could probably spend an entire webinar on, specifically for leaders, about how to best kind of integrate this from an organizational approach. And I know we don't necessarily have that much time, so I'll leave it at that. I will mention and then kind of shift to Mark, because I know he's had some experience with this. One challenge that can exist for leaders are when the systems themselves are sort of complicated and provide a lot of uncontrollables. We talk a lot in our field about controlling the controllables and focusing our attention and energy on the things that we can control. But certainly, you know, Major League Baseball, again, great example of an environmental uncontrollable is the schedule. And so the schedule of Major League Baseball for the foreseeable future is never going to change, but it creates an enormous challenge and disruption for players and coaches and everybody in terms of performance psychology, in terms of mental and emotional demands. So I would kind of kick it over to Mark to ask, how can we integrate performance psychology creatively into systems where maybe the system can't be changed?
Yeah, that's, I mean, well said, Vanessa, because as you're talking, I'm thinking of, things that I wasn't really planning on saying, and all of a sudden it becomes irrelevant. So, but you're right. I mean, it all starts with leaders and kind of that trickle down thing, right? You always see that when you think about individuals who thrive, 99 times out of 100, they're doing it because of the environment, not in spite of, right? And so you're going to find people that will thrive, because they found a way to, but ultimately it's just always easier to do it in that space. And, we have to kind of reflect back on the first thing we need to understand about performance is that everybody, again, athlete, non-athlete, doesn't really matter, has a capacity and an ability, right? A capacity reflects how well a person can perform when the environment and everything is perfectly aligned for them to do well. So if we think of, let's just say, 100-meter runner or a hurdler or whatever, we think of like how fast can they get from the blocks to the finish line, and with everything aligned perfectly for them, time of day, nutrition, sleep, all these different kinds of things, skill of the competition. The reality is that it's never perfectly tailored for any one person at any given time, right? Even personal bests and records and things like that are done even in the face of some adversity. And so they found ways to perform well. So capacity exists, but kind of in theory only, and it's kind of a hypothetical construct. And that's a really big thing to help athletes in particular help navigate, because for the most part, when they've reached the Division I and beyond, so I work with a lot of Olympians and professional athletes once they've moved on from college as well, is that like they're used to thriving, they're used to doing well. They wouldn't have reached this level if they hadn't. And so all of a sudden they're put in a situation where they are not the best, right? They are not the one that's going to be leaned upon in every situation and all that kind of stuff. And so they're not going to be operating at their capacity. They're going to be operating at their ability. We're always just operating at our ability. Our ability reflects where we are today. So if capacity is here, your ability is going to kind of fluctuate back and forth based on a number of factors. Many of those factors are going to be, to Vanessa, your point, uncontrollable, right? You just have, you're powerless to sort of determine what you manipulate that environment. And so when we think about, anybody listening who is in a leadership position, think about how, yes, you want your team to do well, but also assessing like, what can I do to kind of help cultivate an environment that's going to allow their ability to be as close to their capacity as possible? Because you want them to perform well because of what you did, not in spite of what you did. And so, but yet we're still faced with this thing of like, how do we help people perform in situations that just aren't ideal? And I'm reflecting back on an experience I worked with a medical school, and specifically their surgical program. And surgical programs are notoriously hyper competitive, very intense. We're putting you up against each other. You're in high pressure environments. There is no failure. It's like so it's very, very high strung, and people are wound really, really tight. And we had conversations about how do we reimagine what this is going to be like moving forward. And a lot of the resistance were from individuals who were more senior in that faculty. And the major justification for keeping things the way that they were was, well, this is how I was trained. and I turned out fine. And in the back of my head, I'm like, did she turn out fine? But the kind of forward facing me is like, okay, let's explore that. How would you have turned out should the environment have been different? Or what if it was a little bit different? So really kind of challenging that. The reality is that that conversation is not going to help the surgeons in the program right now. So we then have to work with them to help them understand, what to do in situations that just aren't tailored towards their capacity or near their capacity. And a lot of this comes down to understanding the self, right? How do I work? What do I need to do? And you'd be surprised how many high performing people, again, athletes and non-athletes, haven't really had that discussion with themselves, right? They don't have a whole lot of self-awareness because for the most part, they've just kind of floated through. They've been high achieving, very intelligent, gifted, all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden they face a wall and they're like, holy crap, how do I get through this? I'm not just doing it on pure talent alone.
Right.
And so kind of taking that deep dive and figuring out like, okay, what are to Ash's point, like, it's not just a matter of time management and let's look at your schedule, but really thinking about like, when are my high IQ hours? When are my big brain moments, right? So if it's between 8 and 11, then don't schedule anything between 8 and 11. Make that your deep work, right? Make that the time that you're making, those big and impactful plans on a big project and those kinds of things. And that all comes from understanding the self. So there's a lot of different directions we could go, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to touch on that because we didn't technically segue there yet, Mark, but that's a good takeaway for the audience and the individuals that will watch this on the recording, right? You just kind of dropped a strategy or a tool that they could start using tomorrow in order to your point, grow their capacity to tolerate maybe the demand of their performance environment that previously they didn't perceive they could. So I wanted to make sure that we kind of pointed out that's a great takeaway, applicable strategy. Is there another strategy that you would share with this audience? A quick tip, kind of something that, and I know you were touching on the importance of self-awareness, and we talk a lot about self-awareness in order to self-regulate. But let's assume that people here have that awareness. What's something they could do to better regulate, to sort of grow their capacity?
Yeah, so I could literally do like a 60-minute solo talk on this. So I'm really going to try to restrain myself. But one of the things, and anybody who's involved or is doing any sort of reading in performance psychology is probably going to come across the term of mindfulness, right? And it's thrown out all over the place, and it's being mindful, and it's all. Sure, there are apps and all that kind of stuff, but ultimately we have to think about what that means, right? In the greater context of things, being mindful is being present. It's accepting where you are, what your thoughts are, and just kind of being in the moment.
Right.
And so that's a skill, right? That's a skill that is developed. Some people have an easier time, some people kind of struggle through, but from a very bare bones basics kind of starting off, if this is not something that you ever do intentionally, and that's something that you think that you would value in doing in your kind of practical and work related life, is just sort of being present. I would challenge everybody on this call and anybody listening to start with no more than say 5-10 minutes a day, which of something that I call no input, right? So 5-10 minutes of no input, which means no podcasts, no music, no phones, no screens, no nothing. Like, just kind of sitting there having a meal without having, something else to do. Sitting on a bench without necessarily scrolling, just kind of observe, just paying attention. And if it's difficult, that means you need to do it. Because when it comes down to doing specific work related to your job, you're going to find that it's far more effective to do it when you are dialed in. And being dialed in is something that we work a lot with high performing athletes and leaders to develop the ability to do. It doesn't just snap on and happens when you need it to. It's something that is cultivated over time. So that's my big
Love it.
skill. 5-10 minutes a day, no input.
I love that. I think it's so important, especially because even us in our field, I know we're constantly trying to keep up right, with the evolution of the performers that we work with. And so I'm constantly reading, consuming, and it's like the old adage, knowledge is power, but I guess the new adage would be not really, right? Like we need those periods of just being still, being open to the present moment. So love that, Mark. Thanks for sharing that. Melinda, what about you? What is a quick tip you might have, a tangible takeaway someone could start using tomorrow?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's actually related to time management, which we've all touched on even a little bit here in this session. I think that struggle with time management has existed for a very long time across performance domains. But something I've been noticing more recently when I talk to folks is like this interesting connection between time management issues and motivation. And so I'm hearing people talk about, I'm spending so much time on this thing and I don't want to do it. I don't like it. I don't want to do it. And here's this idea or this area where I want to be spending time on that I want to do. And I don't have time to do that because I'm over here with this thing I don't want to do. And it's getting kind of all muddled in there. And so I found somewhat of a game changer for a lot of folks is getting them to shift from, do I want to do this? Or do I like doing this thing? To the question of, what did I actually do today that was worth my time? Was what I did today valuable? And it's a very different question, actually, if we start to play around with that a little bit. I'm not sure how many people on this call listening are parents, but talk about a performance environment all day, every day. I will tell with all my different performance identities, that one is the hardest. And I think as parents, we all have things we don't want to do in this particular role. And for me, it is helping kids with their homework. And I know for some parents, that's their jam. I don't want to do it. I never want to do it. I don't like it. However, um, and trying to convince myself, like, I'm just going to suck it up and like it and be positive. This forced positivity, it doesn't tend to work in these scenarios.
No.
However, is it valuable considering the ages of my kids, right? And that they actually do need a little bit of guidance in terms of homework? Yes. And so for me, when I took the do I want to do it out of the equation, it really changed the energy that I was bringing into it, my ability to focus during it. I was not as easily frustrated. And so it's one of these daily things actually that I will use. I think we could realize with this question as well that certain things you're doing maybe not are worthwhile of your time. I had a client when we were talking about her days, and she said, I'm in meetings 6 to 8 hours most days. I thought that doesn't sound right. I said, is that regardless of whether you want to be doing that or not, is that a valuable use of your time? And as we really started looking at what was going on there, it's like, no, you don't need to have my hand in all of this. Like, and so then it becomes a conversation of shifting time, right? And her schedule to a place where like this was actually valuable. Not everything's going to be, do I want to do it or not? So I think separating that piece out, like kind of that interesting motivational piece, really is an interesting, different way to look at time management.
Very good. Yes, I love that strategy. I think two things I think that I just want to kind of reiterate for the audience. We think of motivation as desire and want, but really motivation is about drive and need, right? And so if we get that twisted, we find ourselves often in a jam. And then the second thing you mentioned there, this idea of false positivity. Dr. Susan David, who wrote the book Emotional Agility, and in addition to Mark's TED Talk, did another great TED Talk on emotional courage. But she says false positivity prevents us from developing the skills necessary to deal with life as it is. So I think that strategy helps us deal with life as it is. That's great. Ashlyn, what about you? Strategy tool, quick tip?
Yeah, quick tip. I just wanted to go back to Mark's point for 1 second. His line about kind of like being still. There's a song by The Head and the Heart, a really good indie band, but their quote is like, the world's just spinning a little too fast. If things don't slow down, we may not last. So just for a moment, let's be still. And the four of the people here on this call understand my love towards music, but I do think one of the challenges though is that we continue to like go from one thing to the next. And I often think it's without being intentional. So my kind of tip is just, how are we intentional? And both in the athletic and the corporate domain is that we feel that we are beholden. So going back to the controllables, we feel athletes and corporate and elite performers, we are beholden to our calendar. And so oftentimes, these are partners, these are, NHL All-Stars. They're not showing up intentional about what they're trying to do in a given day. They're letting the day dictate what it is that they're going to do. And like, I'll go in, I'm like, so what are you going to work on today? Whatever coach just puts up on the board. And I'm like, okay, but you mentioned that you wanted to work on this skill set and you were on the practice, plane 10 minutes beforehand. Did you do it? No. So it's recognizing, like, going back to Mark's point, what is the most productive time of your day? If you find out that if you're a morning person, be intentional about that time frame where you can be your most creative or answering emails. But again, we feel that we are often so beholden to these distractors, and all of a sudden they go like, where I'm going to go answer emails. And then I often liken it, and like my joke, kind of like how Melinda is saying, is that, it's like we're a 5-year-old. Ooh, ding. And then all of a sudden now we're looking at something else. Then another ding happens and now we're in another direction. Can we be intentional about turning off things that might distract us? Can we be intentional about jotting down, what am I trying to accomplish today? And at the end of the day, just reflecting, was I able to commit to the thing that I was trying to be intentional about? So that's one quick thing that I have found with both the athletic population and the corporate population that seems to be an easy to kind of hit on activity.
I think
And
that's
that's
fantastic and something that I think is very commonly forgotten. I think we go through our days and we just go through our days, right? Trying to get to an end point, maybe, the weekend, or maybe a big meeting we have next week to get through, or this webinar or whatever it was, right? And we do it with no intention and no purpose. And to kind of glue everybody's strategies together, really maximizing our performance when setting our intention, we're also maximizing the output and we're minimizing the time we spend on it, right? It makes us more productive. It makes us more engaged. It makes us more deliberate. So I think we have only about 5 minutes left. So I want to thank you all for participating in this with me and sharing your wisdom today. I want to thank the audience. We appreciate all of you taking time out of your day to pop in and hear from us. We do want to be able to continue the conversation about performance psychology with any of you who are interested in continuing that conversation. So we will be sharing our contact information. Actually, the folks at Galway will be sending out some post-webinar emails that will include our contact information, as well as some content that we're going to craft, kind of expanding on these ideas that we were talking about here at the end, actual strategies, tools to integrate performance psychology for individuals, teams, and organizations. So want to say thanks so much to Patrick and Will and all the folks at Galway for having us, and please look out for that communication from them and that additional information from us.
Vanessa, thank you so much. I mean, Vanessa, Mark, Melinda, Ash, this has been really a great conversation. We appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to do this and being so well prepared. I mean, it's really a thoughtful conversation. Clearly, you guys spent some time coordinating. So, thank you for all the attention to detail you put into this. There's so much to kind of reflect on. One thing that really struck me was, people thrive. I think, Mark, you said this, because of the environment, not in spite of it, or high performers do. I think that's a really important takeaway for everyone on this webinar. In a leadership perspective, it really talks to leadership and culture and putting people, in the best possible position to succeed. And I think that's anyone who's in a leadership role could really spend time thinking about that and understand how you can do that better. But that wasn't the only thing you guys talked about that really, landed with me on multiple fronts. So thank you for your time. I really, really appreciate it. As Vanessa mentioned, we'll be sending out certainly the recording of this. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to it a couple times myself, and other content coming out of it. So for the group, the broader group is on. This is our second Arena Series webinar. We're going to come back again in the fall. We haven't announced that topic yet. We are, as a group, heading towards Galway Live in Arena, our event down in Cabo, and we'll have a number of panels out of that event that we'll be pushing out content on to kind of continue probing topics of interest, and and thinking about thought leadership and how Galway Plus and the Arena Series can lean into different topics that are of interest to people from a wide swath of both the business and the sporting and professional world. So stay tuned for that, post June, and we'll also come back in June in the early summer on what our topic will be in the fall. But again, to today, really thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Melinda. Thank you, Ash. Really great conversation. Gave us all a lot to think about. And for those who are on the webinar, thanks for your attendance. Thanks, everyone.